engaged. The whole point of engagement is to get to know who you're going to marry. A lot of times people get married, they don't really know the person they're marrying. These are questions you can have to have detailed discussions. And it also gives you an opportunity to listen well. When people share their story and they receive deep listening, they feel seen, known, understood. That is to say, they feel loved. Okay, so I want to quickly review some stuff as far as the core about, the primary thing that people care about in marriage is they feel conflict, right? Isn't that the main thing we care about? There's conflict. Conflict's going to happen. So this idea of conflict is every marriage has to transition from infatuation into actual love. And what we're saying is a lot of people don't make that transition. They turn into roommates or they get divorced. And there's a shallowness in the relationship. It ought not to be. Marriage by design is seeking to reveal to you how selfish you are. So that it can stare you in the face, you can take responsibility for that and grow. What we saw last week is the appropriate response to a lack of self-control is not seeking to control your spouse. What you also find in your marriage is you can't make the other person do anything. So what you have to do is take responsibility for yourself. Now, by way of review, I want to list out Chris Thurman's lies couples believe. See if these, and if you hear anything tonight that's helpful, if you get one thing, it could be life-changing. So make sure you write it down. Don't assume you're going to remember it. The purpose of marriage is to make you happy. These are all lies. It's not a trick. My spouse can completely meet all my needs. My spouse is a bigger mess of a human being than I am. I feel like my wife could have said that one easily. I am entitled to my spouse's love. Our marital problems are all my spouse's fault. My spouse should accept me just the way I am. My spouse should be just like me. I see my spouse for who my spouse really is. My spouse has to earn my forgiveness. We can reconcile without repenting, otherwise known as sweeping it under the rug. And the last one I'm going to add to Chris's list is, if our marriage is hard, then we must not be soulmates. And if we're not soulmates, I need to eject out of this relationship and go find my soulmate. Again and again and again. That is so not how marriage works. Anybody can be your soulmate in some sense. Okay, so last week was a lot about self-control. And we saw that self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. Self-control, gentleness, patience. Those are the ones I want to key in on. It was about self-control and taking responsibility. So what you have is, you got two people who are interfacing in any relationship, but if there's conflict, then the idea of, you're causing me to suffer, and so I lash out at you, and then when I lash out on that person, their feelings get hurt, so they have to lash out back. And it's a back and forth, and the mentality of that is, I am at the mercy of my spouse's behavior. I'm at the mercy of my spouse's feelings. I'm at the mercy of my spouse's choices. And things begin to feel out of control. But the thing about that is the spouse feels the exact same way based off the response they get. So the idea is I can't force my spouse to do anything. I can't hold them at gunpoint. But what I can do is take responsibility for me. So we want to make informed, Christ-like responses. So what we're going to do tonight is draw a distinction between responding. You can do it any other way you want to, but responses and reactions. Okay? So, but before we get there, I kind of want to do a quick aside, because I want you to understand, when things feel out of control and you're lashing out, okay, so there's a spectrum. I want to keep referring back to it. On the knee-jerk response from those with insecure attachments, we want to, either this side of the spectrum is the meltdown idea. We have a meltdown experience, and the other end of the spectrum is a stonewaller, right? These are both negative responses that we give that are not like Jesus Christ. So meltdown says, I'm going to erupt all over you because I'm trying to get your attention because maybe I'm not used to, getting people's attention easily. So I have to emote all over you. And then that's what I'm actually seeking to do on that because I'm experiencing all negative emotions as the same emotion. I'm seeking to get your attention, but also asking you, telling you, handle it, take care of it. The opposite end of the spectrum is a stonewaller. Stonewaller is this passive-aggressive, cold anger idea, which is like, I'm going to withhold affection. So I'm going to abandon you before you can abandon me. Okay, so those are, now, if a meltdown person will default, go to a stonewall if the meltdown's not working. The stonewaller can get to the point where, because the stonewall is not working, they'll revert over to a meltdown. Okay, so what we were saying last week is just quickly, we need to realize when we're doing that, we are in a fight or flight response. And we're seeking to regain control by exerting our will on the other person, but the other person's likely doing the exact same thing. And so obviously we have to get divorced, right? So if we take this other principle that we keep coming back up against is this idea that change happens through being loved into loving. And that's what marriage is going to do. It lays you bare, makes you completely vulnerable to the other person so they actually see the worst parts of you. And then when that happens, we have the actual ability to embrace our spouse in their most unlovely place. And if we can embrace in love, and we have to talk about what that looks like, we have the opportunity to be like Jesus. And that's where we keep going back to Romans 5:8, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That takes a lot of strength. Okay, that takes a lot of things, but it takes, dependency on getting, having God be the ultimate source of your love and soul filling over and above expecting your spouse to be God to be able to fill your soul in a way they never can. Okay, so I want to talk quickly about this idea of being pushed past your threshold. Is this only me that's ever experienced something like this? The idea that, okay, you have limits and you can keep it under control. Everything's good, right? People try to push your buttons, but you can handle it. But then there's a certain place where we go past this threshold and we lose it. We go into meltdown or stonewall. Is anybody relating to anything I'm saying? Okay, good. So I want to give you a few quotes, put them all together, because, okay, this quick aside that I'm trying to do is this. I want you to know kind of what's going on with your soul when you feel out of control, when you're in that massive conflict. I want you to know what's going on with you, because once you understand what's going on with you, like at least, like you're not having to experience it in real time, you can kind of step out and practice self-awareness, the idea of, okay, I can be more aware of what's going on with me. Like I need to be aware when I first start to feel threatened, when I feel a fight or flight going on. So I want us to understand what's happening with us, because if we can understand it, it's very easy to know what to do in response. It's very simple. It's very simple. We don't often catch it. And so what happens is like a trap is being set for us, and we step into the trap and we lose all control. We stop thinking rationally, and then just the result of that interface with our spouse is distance, destruction. Like bricks being built up in the doorway of communication. If you build enough bricks in that doorway and there's no back and forth with you, like the relationship is over. And then you have to decide if it's going to be a roommate or living in the same house, like some kind of social contract, or a divorce or whatever. Okay, so the idea, the emotions and physical sensations that were imprinted during trauma, if any of us have experienced trauma, and a lot of us have, the emotions and physical sensations that were imprinted during trauma are experienced, I want you to get this, very important point, not as memories, but as disruptive physical reactions in the present. And I'm just talking about the mechanics of how humans work. So and I'm not trying to make excuses for us, I'm trying to help us understand what's actually going on with us. So if I'm triggered and I'm tempted to get flooded, like we talked about with the Gottman stuff, then a lot of times we're not even realizing that's what's happening. We just think this person made me mad, okay? But what's actually happening is we're feeling a sense of angst Because something from the past has been triggered, we're not aware of that because it's not like a memory is reconstructed in our consciousness, alerting us to the fact that this reminds us of this thing that happened way back in the day. It does emerge, however, as a disruptive physical reaction in the present. So we have to do the work, if we can, do the work to realize, I'm feeling this kind of way because of this kind of thing. If we're not aware of it, we can't really change it. The first step to changing it is to be aware of it. So what we're trying to do is move away from this idea of you made me mad. That's the generic way I'm putting it. So these past things that happen to us, these traumatic things, can emerge as a disruptive experience, a disruptive physical reaction. So when we are in states dominated by our emotional brains, we are unable to learn from experience, but instead we are see if any of these describe you. We have a sense of being uptight, inflexible, stubborn, depressed, unable to achieve a state of creativity or playfulness. It's really helpful if you realize, I'm in that state right now. So most likely it's been, you've been triggered and you feel like this person in front of you is a threat. And so you're going to retaliate. And how's that going to go? When have you ever retaliated and it made you feel all warm and fuzzy towards the other person and you just had a great night the rest of the night? It's a lie. It's a deception. Right? But it seems rational at the time. It seems logical to launch this attack against the person you claim to love, you made a vow to love on your wedding day. It seems rational to lay into them in the moment. Because you need to force them to love you the way they promised. So it's like this sense of fear or loss that immediately expresses itself in anger. The anger is the idea of, I want to seek to regain a sense of control. Control. Regain a sense of control. Now, what did we already say? You can't control another person. Who's in control? God. I believe God's in control. So we can let God be God and not have to take the role of God on ourselves or force our spouse to be God. Okay. So I'm simply saying this, trying to be aware of what's going on with you. So the goal when we have experienced trauma is to bring our emotional and rational brains back into balance. This is Kurt Thompson. So we can feel in control with how we respond to situations in life. So we are no longer triggered into states of hyper or hypo-arousal. So that we are no longer continually pushed outside our window of tolerance, outside our range of optimal functioning when we are triggered. We become reactive and disorganized, and our filters stop working. Unwanted images from the past can invade our minds. We panic and fly into rages, or we shut down and feel numb. I'll say it again. We panic and fly into rages, or we shut down and feel numb. What is that describing? That's the meltdown Stonewall thing again, just different language. So the idea of Gottman's thing is we start to have negative sentiment override, whereby we keep having these negative experiences with our spouse, and so now we begin to retroactively do rewrite history. So now what? Revisionist history. We start to say, on my wedding day, I was going to pick out the one thing that went wrong and make that characterize the whole of the day, the whole of the event. Yeah, remember you were late to your own wedding? That should have told me right there you didn't care. When just regardless of everything else amazing that happened that day, right? Negative sentiment override. Okay, so the heart of I want to have another quote for you. The heart of relational trauma. Relational trauma is the natural desire to attach and connect, followed unfortunately by betrayal, abandonment, and violation. I want to say that again. The heart of relational trauma, what's the essence of relational trauma? Because the past can be imported into the present and into the future. So this relational trauma, the essence of it is the natural desire to attach and connect. Children realize we have to attach and connect to other humans in order to survive. However, as we seek to attach and connect, instead of connection or attachment, we experience betrayal, abandonment, and violation. Now, if that has happened to you, it gets imprinted, and then you have this anticipation that the same thing is going to happen with your spouse. So even though it's this little fight you're having, a whole lot of history can come into play, because otherwise, let me ask you a question. If a little kindergartner called you a name What's a childish name calling? Is one that reminds me from my own past was stupid head. I can't. That's a little too extreme. That scatological stuff, I can't even. But the stupid head, like, how childish is that? Now, if a kid called me stupid head, a little kindergartner, am I going to get upset about that? I hope not. But yet, if my spouse called me something equivalent, early on in my marriage, I have a strong temptation to say, okay, I feel completely disrespected, and I'm going to associate that with any betrayal or abandonment I've experienced in the past. Suddenly, I am at very high amplitude, and I'm erupting all over. And it could have been just some miscommunication. But yet I went from 0 to 60 in half a second. Why is that? How do you justify that? Why couldn't I just laugh at my wife and say, hey, she needs a hug, she's tired, she's frustrated, she's overwhelmed, and she's like maybe not handling it very well, and she's lashing out at me, but that means she needs more of my love, not less. That's the challenge, and that's why I'm saying to the men, this is a test. Marriage has the opportunity to turn you, grow you into an actual man. That's the way I look at it for myself, and again, I'm telling my own story when I say that. So the only way we can access, this is again Thompson, the only way we can access our emotional brain is through self-awareness. We have access to that part of our brain, the medial prefrontal cortex, which is like 9 main categories, that notices what is going on inside of us, which allows us to feel what we're feeling. So this, all it's saying is like, okay, we have to begin to practice some self-awareness when these things are going on inside of your soul to start to realize it. So we're not reacting, we can respond to it and say, okay, I wonder what's going on there. So most people's fear, this is a really good one. I don't remember where I got this one. Oh yeah, I do. Most people's fear are rooted in their inability to tolerate their own emotions. I want to say that again. Most people's fears are rooted in their inability to tolerate their own emotions. Like, there's a sense in which if I start to feel like this knife in my back, in my heart simultaneously, I can't stand the feeling, so I erupt, and seek to cause the other person to stop it. What's the opposite of that, though? I can sit there in my pain and let it wash over me and move through that and begin to say, what's going on with me? Why am I feeling this way? Now, if that's happening, I don't have to be afraid of those negative emotions. What I need to do is feel those feelings. Because what we've said in the past is those emotions it's an information network. It's seeking, your soul is trying to communicate with your consciousness. And what we try to keep doing is, that feels bad, especially as Americans, if something feels bad, we just want to get rid of it, right? Take a substance or a pill or do some kind of activity to feel better immediately. But that's not how our souls work. We have to face it. So it's like, okay, what is my soul seeking to communicate to me? Where did that come from? What's going on with that? Now, spiritually, all that needs to be filtered into a prayer life. That's what Psalms is all about, Lamentations, Job, parts of Job. So some people have said it this way, the overarching goal, I'm going to tell you what to do in just a moment as far as the easiest, and I said it last week, I'm going to say it again. Most people's, the overarching goal of therapy is to convert implicit memory to explicit memory. What is that saying? It's simple as this. The process, here's what you need. You do not need to erupt all over your spouse and get angry. You do not need to have a meltdown. You do not need to go stonewall it. It's just not necessary, actually. Because it's for lots of reasons, but one, it's counterproductive. It's not going to help. So a lot of those times, before I get to the simple answer, like to use Gottman's language again, is those are bids for connection. Hey, I feel far from you. I want to feel close. Now, a lot of times, people we're called to love won't say that. They'll use accusation to say, hey, would you love me? I feel a little distant from you. Instead, they'll say, you never, absolute language, you never love me, X, Y, or Z. Like, now, when someone says, you completely fail, always, do you feel like just rising up to the challenge of loving them well and embracing them? Do you? But if you can interpret that, okay, that's a bid for connection. They feel distant, they want to feel close. Let's let them do that. Instead, we say, oh, is that the way you're going to treat me? And then it just spirals. Okay, so when it says the overarching goal of therapy, which means healing, is to convert implicit memory to explicit memory, okay, I'm going to say it again. We are all icebergs. We have these two layers beneath the surface. This is Todd Hall's illustration, which is a great summary from a lot of other people. And we have this one layer above the surface of the water, of the iceberg. And we think we're thinking rationally all the time. What's being argued now from neuroscience is like the emotions are a lot of times what's driving us. And those emotions are code that don't have words attached to them. And that bottom layer is like, it's just code with like nothing close to propositional content as far as words. And that emerges up, finally up to the second layer, just beneath the surface, to these feelings. And so in order for those feelings to subside, they need to get this signal of message received. Now, here's the simplest way to get them to tell your emotions to, hey, message received. The idea of feeling the feeling is when we take words and assign them, attach them to the feelings that we're experiencing. Is that so simple? And I said last week at the end, do an experiment. Okay, before I say the experiment, don't let me forget that. It's this, I said, the scientific experiment would be this. Let something like happen to you where it really bothers you and it's like a high amplitude moment. It seriously discourages you and like it bothers, like you have internal turmoil, okay? Like on a scale from 1 to 10, let it be a 8 or 9 or 10. And I want you to seal your lips. Don't talk to another soul about it for like a week or 2 weeks. I want you to have that experience of what happens to your soul. And I'm arguing it is like battery acid just sitting on a piece of metal, just eating. And Jeff could do a better illustration with that. But just eating through that metal. It's not going to go away until the acid is what? Neutralized? You got to put some baking soda on that. Is that right? Otherwise, it's going to keep eating and eating. It's like, that's what that stuff is doing. Because the emotions are like, I'm not going away. I don't care how many drugs you do or how many other negative coping strategies you do, because those strategies are never going to work because you're running from something. And how God designed us is, if you want those things to go away, you got to face it. And you have to process it. So 2 weeks, don't talk to another soul. Then, in contradistinction to that, have another traumatic event happen to you, and your soul's in turmoil, and then immediately run to another person that you trust and pour your heart out. And see if you don't have a visceral response very soon into that you pouring your heart out, and see if you don't immediately begin to calm down. That is where your soul is. So when we talked about, just a quick review, like when we talked about insecure attachments versus secure attachments, secure attachments come from children who were raised in households where there was the care from the caretakers was consistent, available, and responsive, simply, without the expression of negative emotions in front of or toward the child. Consistent, available, and responsive. And so that creates a secure attachment. And the primary thing we wanted to extract from someone who grew up in a home like that, which is amazing and beautiful, with this secure attachment is this. They immediately know this stable type of person, what they're good at, as soon as they begin to feel these negative emotions, they realize it. And then what do? They say, oh, I quickly need to go to a safe person that I know that loves me, and share that with them. And when you share that with them, you feel better. So simple, right? So that is the strategy. Okay, so and when I say share that with them, what are we doing? We're matching words to the emotions. And then your soul gets the signal, the message received, and they begin to subside. And the cool thing about that is this negative thing that happened to you, if you handle it that way, brought you closer to the person. There's a bond there because you went through something together. If you'll do that with your wife, it is amazing. She will not stop complimenting you and telling you how much she thinks you're handsome and loves you, and she won't be quiet about it. And I hope my wife is watching this. She's homesick, and she's gonna. I hope she's laughing right now. But so those negative things in life can tear you apart, or they can bring you together if you handle it right. That's all you got to do. I know maybe it's oversimplification, but okay, so what we're saying is this. The 3-step process we often talk about is we need to tell the story. A lot of times that means writing it out, but tell the story. And when I say story, what I mean specifically about that is that's the experience of the video camera footage, but the story you tell from that. It's not just video camera footage, is it? Like a CCTV feed. It's the story you told about that event that includes emotional content. You share that story, and that's the first part. Second part is in the presence of an empathetic / compassionate witness. Hopefully, hopefully that could be your spouse someday if it's not already. And so that the third step, so you can reassign the meaning of that experience. I think I added a fourth part last week. I'm wondering what that was. So that's a beautiful thing. And so that's why again, Gottman said that people who are in marriages like this recover from the tragedies of life events much more quickly. Like if they get fired from their job, or if there's a medical diagnosis or whatever. So, and that's also why, like, Brad Wilcox is saying something like, people who are in very happy marriages have a 545% higher chance of being happy. Okay. So, that's a quick review. Now, having said that, what happens if you're not in a marriage like that? You can't force the other person to be what you would wish they were. But what you can do is control how you respond. So the first thing you do is realize if you've been reacting like you're emoting all over, then what we just described, you got to start doing that yourself. We have to do the work where we realize, why am I responding in X, Y, or Z? And why am I taking that out on my spouse? So that being said, boundaries in marriage is not about fixing, changing, or, sorry to say it, punishing your mate, your spouse. I don't even like the word mate, or I don't like the word partner either. Your spouse. If you aren't in control of yourself, the solution is not learning to control someone else. Make sense? I love that statement. Okay, I knew my wife was going to text me. Okay, that was good. If you're not in control of yourself, the solution is not learning to control someone else. The solution is learning self-control. Can we agree on that? That's a big ask, but it can be life-changing for you and your marriage. Impure hearts. So the last thing I want to say from last week, I'll say a couple more things. Now I got to move quickly. Impure hearts. You got to check your heart. You got to check your motives. Impure hearts use boundaries to act out feelings such as revenge and anger. Oh, you know that boundaries course that Timothy taught? I'm just practicing boundaries with you. When in fact, what do we say? It's not a boundary, it's a barrier. And you're actually using this. You can use all that. You can weaponize this whole curriculum against your spouse. You think you're going to have God's blessing on your life? You think you're going to have God's blessing on your marriage? If you're weaponizing the material? No, don't do it. So it starts with, you cannot approach your spouse if you haven't checked your motives. If you're not coming from a place of love, it's not going to work. Yes, like, you know what? It probably is revenge or anger. I need to stop and pray. I really need to get my heart right. Because none of us is pure, we have to search our motives for establishing boundaries to make sure that they serve love and not our impure motives. Using distance or withdrawal of love, for example, so that's boundaries language. He's just describing the stone wall, didn't he? For example, to punish the other is a sign that we are setting boundaries not to resolve the conflict, but to get revenge. Now, he mentioned this correct response. He's like, I'm counseling, I think it was Joe and Caroline, and he's like, ping pong. Why do you do that? Because she made me. Why do you do that? Because he made me. Why do you do that? Because she made me. And it goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right? Ad infinitum. So the correct response the counselor was looking for was this. The husband will hopefully say this. I get angry at her because she made me, right? No, because I'm too immature to respond to her more helpfully. I'm deeply sorry for that and need some help. I want to be able to love her correctly no matter what her behavior is. Can you help me? Don't you want to get to the place where that's your normal, natural, knee-jerk response? Your emotions, feelings, and behaviors are your responsibility. Quick review. Learn the difference between a reaction and a response. We're going to do a little bit more of that this evening. A response requires taking responsibility for our emotions and thoughts. I have freedom to choose how I respond. Now, I'm not trying to say if you're angry, stop being angry. I don't think it's actually an option to say, I don't think that's going to work. What you can choose, though, what you do have control over is what expression are you going to give to that anger? What are you going to do with it? What are you going to channel the anger into? Is it going to be lashing out, whether hot anger or cold anger? Or are you going to channel the anger into communication while simultaneously maintaining your patience and gentleness? So I think when you're feeling these kind of ways, I think the simplest way to put it is you channel it into a communication event. Like, I want to communicate to you what's going on with me. I'm trying to stay away from this language of you made me. Like, let me just tell you what I'm experiencing internally. And I haven't figured out why that is yet. And I'm not trying to get out of my responsibility, but I want to, and maybe you can't explain this in the moment, but like, hey, spouse, let me explain to you what's going on in my soul right now. You wouldn't believe it. And I'm trying to work on this. Like, I don't want to take it out on you. You certainly don't deserve that. But like, that is my temptation I'm struggling with right now. When you communicate like that, you know what it allows your spouse to do? It allows your spouse, instead of having to come at you or to protect themselves, to come alongside of you. And isn't that what you want? Isn't that what we want? We want some comfort when we're struggling. So we're gonna flesh that out a little bit tonight. A reaction seeks to make the other person responsible for our emotions and thoughts. I am a victim because you made me angry. You are forcing me to yell and lose my temper. So, okay, you have some anger, but no one forced me to yell, and no one's forcing me to lose my temper. So the idea of Timothy is like, why is it that you're so angry? So I want to step out of myself, and I'm looking at myself over there like, wow, you look like an angry man. Why is that? What's going on with you? Like, this should not affect you that much. What's going on with you? So do you see how, like, I'm observing what's going on with me instead of experiencing it firsthand, or at least trying to do both? Okay, so let me just pause and slow down for a second. Does anybody have any questions about what's been said so far? I feel like it's very simple. I'm not trying to overly complicate it. It's simply like, hey, when I'm in, I love Gottman's statement. It's my favorite statement from the whole book. It's, when you're in pain, the world stops and I listen. When you're in pain, the world stops and I listen. That's all we're talking about. That one statement is better than everything I just said for the last 35 minutes, or actually 30 minutes. Okay? No questions. Perfect. Thank you, guys. We'll find out if you had any questions if you're here next week. I want to read you one more quick statement from the last week, and this is so beautiful, I wanted to repeat it. One woman said it, so this is a testimony. One woman said it this way: before I married Tom, I was so caught up in my own insecurities and fears to really even know who I was. I have been so blessed by the way he loved me. When I was afraid or irresponsible in the early years, he was patient, not reactive. He was strong enough to love me and require more of me at the same time. He did not let me get away with being like I was, but he never punished me for how I was either. I had to begin to take responsibility for working through my barriers to love. I could not blame him for my faults. As he loved me more and more, I was able to change and let go of the ways that I was. All that person is saying is that my spouse loved me into loving. And that's what we keep saying, is that's what's actually transformative, is loving someone into loving. That does not mean you can't call them out or confront them with their failures or their sin. It doesn't mean you sweep everything under the rug. It simply means you check your motives, and when you can approach them in love, and you have patience, and you have gentleness, you can actually discuss and talk about the behavior that's being exhibited. Not because the person is the problem, but the behavior or pattern of behavior is the problem. So we're going to talk about, that's Gottman again. Okay, so we're going to spend the next 2 weeks, the rest of tonight and next week, talking about these 10 laws, and I'm going to give you a handout to take those with you tonight, okay, which I have right here. So we're going to run through these somewhat quickly, and again, I want you to think about the ones that like click with you, and then we'll soon be done. Okay. Law number 1, the law of sowing and reaping. I love this story because it sets up a lot of the others. We'll spend a little bit of time here, and then we'll run faster, okay? So let me read this quick excerpt. Law number 1, the law of sowing and reaping. Amy and Randall had been married for 8 years, and they loved each other. However, when he was angry or upset, Randall became moody and would withdraw from Amy and the kids, except for occasional outbursts of anger. When his manufacturing business was struggling, he would sit silently through dinner. Once during this period, the children were arguing at the dinner table. Out of the blue, Randall said, "Amy, can't you keep these children in line? I can't even have a moment's peace in my own home." And with that, he stormed out of the kitchen, into the home office, turned on the computer, and stayed there till the kids went to bed. What's happening there? What kind of response is that? It's somewhat of a meltdown that turned into a stonewall, right? That's the way I look at it. Amy was hurt and confused, but she had a pattern of handling Randall's moods. She would try to cheer him up by being positive, encouraging, and compliant. He has a hard job, Amy would think. Nurturance is what he needs. And for the next few hours, and sometimes days, she would center the family's existence around Dad's mood. Everyone would walk on eggshells around him. No one was to complain or be negative about any subject for fear of setting him off. And Amy would constantly try to draw him out, affirm him, and make him happy. All her emotional energy went into helping Randall feel better. Amy was trying her best to solve the problem of her husband's moods, but they were just getting worse. His moods became blacker and more severe, and they lasted for longer periods of time. What was worse, Randall seemed to be unaware of his moods. "You're just overreacting," he would tell her, and sometimes he would even blame her for his moods. "If you were more supportive, this wouldn't happen," he would say. Amy felt terrible. What was going wrong? What was going wrong? So here's another side note. We're not doing the parenting class yet, but just a quick side note. The children are being forced to be the parents in this case because dad is supposed to help regulate their children's negative emotions, but now the children are realizing dad's upset. They're walking on eggshells, which means they're using that walking on eggshell strategy to help regulate dad's emotions. So who's regulating who? It's a role reversal where the kids are being more like the parent than the dad is. You see that? We don't want to have to ask so if you want to create insecure attachment with your children, then force them to be on eggshells around you. Because what's happening is the reason why they would feel the need to do that is because you're exhibiting negative emotions either in front or towards them, sometimes both. So and one way to put it, he's just being immature and childish. And I like, what man doesn't enter into a marriage with some of these tendencies? We all start here, okay? So, obviously, he's at high amplitude, he's feeling these negative emotions, and he's taking it out on his family. What does he need to do? He needs to match words to his emotions in the presence of a compassionate witness so that they can get the message received. He needs to be able to have enough self-control where he waits for an opportunity to do that. It's and he needs to know, hey, I can be loving to him. I got enough self-awareness. I realize what's going on. I'm taking a lot of hits at work. My temptation is to be full of angst. I can go to prayer with this. I realize my wife and I are going to have maybe go on a walk and talk about it for date night or whatever. And in the meantime, I can be okay. Consequences grow spouses up. God designed marriage to be a place not only of love, but of growth. One pathway to growth is learning that actions have consequences. You always hurt the one you love is true. It is an act of love to allow our spouse to reap the effects of his selfishness or irresponsibility, unless, of course, we are acting out of revenge or desire to see our spouse suffer. Okay? So actions have consequences. That's going to be a big idea for tonight. When we set and keep limits with our spouse, we are saying to him, I may love you, but I'm not paying for your problems. Refusing to rescue your spouse, such as by refusing to cheer him up when he is pouting, pity party, sacrificing to pay off his credit card bill, calling in sick for him when he's been out partying the night before, helps keep the problem with him. So this idea of, society calls it the idea of codependency. And the language we used last week is the idea of in a relationship, often you have one person who's over-functioning and another person who's under-functioning. And the over-functioner allows the under-functioner to continue to exist. Okay? Why is that? What is that dynamic? Because the over-functioner is removing the natural consequences that would allow that person to grow. Okay? Now, it's like, okay, I want to do that, but the problem there is you really have to check your heart in a relationship because it's so easy to say, okay, it's a boundary, I'm allowing you to suffer consequences because you crossed the boundary, when in fact it's just revenge or anger. Okay? So relational and functional reaping. This is relationship and function. These two categories real quickly, and then we'll come back to what we were just saying. This relational part of marriage involves the emotional bond that two people have to each other, such as how deeply connected they are and how they feel about each other, both positively and negatively. So I just want to stop and say there, like, if in your marriage you have to have, if you want to maintain a strong bond, you have to maintain times where both people feel seen, known, understood, with reference to, that is how we regulate negative emotions. A lot of what humans are doing on their free time around the world, especially in America, is all we're trying to do is regulate our negative emotions. We don't have to go to a dispensary to do that. We can simply get with someone we feel safe that knows that loves us and communicate all the things we're going through. And if they'll see, know, and understand us, that is to say, listen to us, as I said before, the result is you feel better and the bond, the relationship is stronger. It's a beautiful thing. That's how it's supposed to work. But then, okay, so that's the relational aspect. Emotional connection is the primary essential property there. The second component is this functional part of marriage has to do with the doing aspects of the relationship, such as paying the bills, managing time, cooking meals, keeping house, rearing children. So this is where men, we can fail, be like, if we have these responsibilities and like it's really important to our spouse, maybe way more important to our spouse than to us, and if we fail on these, then it has a tendency to deplete or diminish the relational connection, the emotional connection, okay? So like you can be really good at being a real good listener, but if you forgot to pay the electric bill for the third time, you know, it's going to affect that emotional connection, what have you, okay? In the relational aspect of marriage, sowing and reaping has to do with how spouses affect and impact each other's heart. Amy and Randall had a problem in relational sowing and reaping. He was being hurtful and difficult, yet Amy took the consequences of his behavior for him. Another example of relational sowing and reaping is the demanding wife. And this is usually where the men give an amen, okay? Which is not good. Who insists that every second of her husband's attention and time be spent on or with her. She sows self-centeredness and bondage, and he reaps resentment, guilt, and a loss of freedom. So in the functional aspects, sowing and reaping is more easily identifiable because tasks are more concrete. For example, a husband may sow overspending while his wife reaps the result by having to get a job or by scrimping on food and other necessities to meet the family budget. Or another example, a wife may sow careless housekeeping while her husband reaps discomfort in his own home and embarrassment when company comes over. We're setting the table. We're gonna tidy it all up and make it a good summary here in a moment, so just bear with me. In either aspect, the problem is the same. The one who has the problem isn't facing the effects of the problem, and things don't change in a marriage until the spouse who is taking responsibility for a problem that is not theirs decides to say or do something about it. So all we're saying at this point is this: the person whose responsibility is needs to take responsibility for it. If the other person continues to take responsibility for it, bad stuff happens, like resentment. So it cannot, in a marriage, the overarching pattern cannot be one person fails in their responsibility, while the other person is always paying the consequence. That's unbalanced. The person who is sowing has to be the person who is reaping. That's an easier way to put it. Does that make sense? Now, if you're a Christian, you're like, wait, aren't we supposed to bear one another's burdens and fulfill the law of Christ? Where's that come in on here? Galatians 6:2. We're going to bring that in immediately. The law number 2, though, and to do that, law number 2 is the law of responsibility. So the first one was the law of sowing and reaping. The second law is the law of responsibility. If one spouse feels no sense of responsibility to the other, this spouse is, in effect, trying to live married life as a single person. Now, let me say that again. If one spouse feels no sense of responsibility to the other, the spouse is, in effect, trying to live married life as a single person. That's why you want to do your best to try to figure that out before you get married. Hence this book. Okay. So the law of responsibility is this. We are responsible to each other, but not for each other. Huh? We're responsible to each other, but not for each other. Okay, that's still confusing. I'm going to clarify. The Bible teaches it this way. And here's where he's going to give you 2 categories to bring some clarity. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you fulfill the law of Christ. And each of you should carry his own load. That's Galatians 6:2 and verse 5. So notice the 2 words that are being used. Burden and load. That's where this distinction is being drawn. So the word burden, verse 2, indicates a back-breaking boulder. This is the way they understand it. A back-breaking boulder, such as a financial, health, or emotional crisis. Spouses actively support each other when one is carrying an overwhelming burden. Someone gets a medical diagnosis, they're in the hospital. You can't say, oh, that's your responsibility. I have boundaries. That's not what we're saying, okay? Because what are we talking about? We're talking about a burden. The term load, though, from verse 5, however, indicates one's daily responsibilities of life. The idea, hey, you're supposed to pay the electric bill. You keep forgetting. And you're spending that money on something else, and as a result, the kids don't have the nutrition, the groceries that they need. Okay? So I can't keep doing X, Y, or Z because the more I do X, Y, or Z to make up for the fact that you don't pay the electric bill, you spend that money on something else, the more you seem to do it. So this includes one's feelings, okay? The load, everybody has their own load. Yes, if you have a burden, we want to help shoulder that burden. But as far as your own responsibilities on the day-to-day, I can't keep removing the consequences you're supposed to experience if you fail in your responsibility. This is where it becomes like, okay, we want to enforce consequences to help the person grow in their maturity. So taking responsibilities of life, what does that include? Feelings, attitudes, values, handling of life's everyday difficulties. Spouses may help each other out with loads, but ultimately each person must take care of his own daily responsibilities. 2 extremes occur in marriage when the law of responsibility is not obeyed. On the one hand, a husband will neglect his responsibility to love his wife. He may become selfish, inconsiderate, or hurtful. On the other hand, a husband may take on responsibility his wife should be bearing. For example, his wife may be unhappy, and he may feel responsible for her happiness. Perhaps he feels that he isn't making enough money, showing enough interest in her activities, or helping enough around the house. So he tries and tries to make an unhappy person happy. This is an impossible project. While a husband should be sympathetic towards his unhappy wife and take responsibility for his own hurtful behavior, he shouldn't take responsibility for her feelings. They are hers, and she must handle them herself. I would like to elaborate on that for sake of time. We'll keep moving. Spouses should refuse to rescue or enable the sinful or immature behavior of their partners. Couples have a duty to set limits on each other, their spouse's destructive acts or attitudes. Any questions about that one? You see the difference? So the language we're using is burden versus load. We want to help bear one of those burdens, but the idea of I don't want to be an over-functioner seeking to keep removing the consequences from your choices with reference to your failure and your daily responsibilities. Okay? So the first thing I would want to do about that is it's an opportunity for a conversation. And if you want to have a conversation, it's a beautiful thing. Communication is often like the best and most beautiful step to resolve it, communication. But in order to have effective communication, you really have to start with checking your own heart. Like, do I have fruit of the Spirit? Do I have self-control? Do I have love, patience, gentleness? Those are the ones I think about. So it's the idea of when I engage in that conversation, I'm not seeking to get revenge or take it out on them. I'm seeking to build them up. Because I want to use any influence I have to cause the person to flourish. Some of the way at times we can use consequences to help people flourish. Okay, we'll move it on to law 3. How can I get my spouse to? ? Anybody relate to that? How can I get my spouse to just, if they could only get them to do X, Y, or Z? Spouses often try to use boundaries to assert power over them, and it doesn't work. Your spouse has their own choices. Think how you feel when someone tries to make you change. How do you feel when someone tries to force their will on you? You like it? You feel super motivated and inspired? We feel, it's like you're asking for rebellion, right? Kurt, you relate to that? He's got 3 descriptors here. Resentful, rebellious, and resistant. They are, so like when someone approaches you like that, you're just trying to think of all the reasons why they're wrong. These are not the attitudes of a person who's eager to change. The law of power clarifies what we do and don't have power over. We have no power over the attitudes and actions of the other person. We can't make our spouse grow up. We can't stop our spouse from exhibiting a troublesome habit or character flaw. We can't force our spouse to come home on time for dinner, to refrain from yelling at us, or to initiate conversations with us. The fruit of the Spirit is self-control, not other control. God himself does not exercise such power over us, even though he could. If you don't have the power to force your spouse to be the person you want them to be, it is helpful to realize you lack the power to make yourself the person you want to be also. So it's like the idea, okay, if I'm struggling to be the best person God has called me to be sometimes. So if I have compassion for myself, maybe I can have some compassion for my spouse as well, right? There's a Bible, it reminds me of this Bible verse that Jesus was talking about in the Sermon on the Mount. We'll come back to that. So a codependent spouse is one who takes responsibility for the actions of another so that they don't have to. That's his definition. He randomly brings this up. A codependent spouse is one who takes responsibility for the actions of another so that other doesn't have to take responsibility themselves. If you don't have power to change your spouse, what do you have power over? Again, we're in the law of power. You don't have the power to force them. So what do you have power over? You have the power to confess, submit, repent of your own hurtful ways in your marriage. You can identify these hurtful ways, ask God for his help to overcome them, and be willing to change. Whatever your spouse does that bothers you, it's certain that you do things that bother them also. Anybody want to push back on that? Yeah, I thought you knew that. Wait a minute, I'm perfect, so what are you saying? So if you want your spouse to listen to your boundaries, ask him where you may be violating his. When you are hurt or upset, you may try to control everything, or you may withdraw into silence. Nothing is more conducive to a spouse's growth than a spouse who sincerely wants to change. Can I just say that again? That was worth the night right there. Nothing is more conducive to a spouse's growth than a spouse who sincerely wants to change. So if the idea of, hey, the first point of the conversation is not how they messed up. The first point of the conversation is how you're taking responsibility for the ways that you responded or reacted incorrectly. All right, you have the power to grow. This is the important paragraph. You have the power to grow through the unhelpful ways you are dealing with your marriage problems. We can just stop right there again. So, what do we have power over? I have power to grow through the unhelpful ways I'm dealing with the marriage problems. So you have two things going on when you have conflict. You have the original problem, but then the second problem is how we're responding to the problem. So can you see how a conversation is going to get real confusing? Because you ever try to get in a debate with someone where as soon as you're starting to win the argument, they switch the subject? And they say, well, what about this, and what about this, and what about this? And I was like, okay, I want to get clarity on this issue before we move to the second issue. But then you get down the road, like into 3 or 4 subjects later, and then they revert back to the first one before you've really settled that third or fourth one. And you're like, I can't get anywhere with them. And then all of a sudden the conversation's over. Do you feel satisfied? So here's what we can do. We realize, let's keep this conversation organized. I can't force them to do anything, but I can have control over how I'm responding. So few marriage problems are the result of 100% one spouse and 0% the other. Do you believe that? Again, what is being said? I'm going to say it again. Few marriage problems are the result of 100% one spouse and 0% the other. So what's happening? Again, you have the problem, and then you have the second problem, which is how we're responding to it, reacting to it. It's creating the second thing. So each contributes to the problem. You may be the disciplinarian in the family and feel that your wife is too relaxed. You might resent getting pegged as the bad guy with the kids. However, your contribution to the problem may be that you step in when she should, or you may nag her, or you may not let her know that you feel powerless. You have the power to start identifying ways that you are actively or passively contributing to the problem, and you have the power to change over time. Jesus called this process taking the plank out of your eye first. Matthew 7, 1 through 5. It is so here's what I'm saying. Often what we're doing is mirroring the behavior of the person in front of us. So I say this, give your spouse behavior that's worth mirroring. If you start the conversation by taking responsibility for whatever you've contributed to it, hey, the way I reacted to you was not loving. I lost it, and I can share what was going on with me, but I just want to take responsibility. You didn't deserve that. It was wrong. Will you forgive me? And you might be thinking, okay, that may be 10% of the problem. My spouse is responsible for 90%. But when you take responsibility, you're not trying to manipulate them, but you're showing them what taking responsibility looks like. And isn't that what they really need to do? So we can help them by showing them what it looks like, irregardless if they end up taking responsibility or not. So we don't have the power to change someone else, but we can influence them. You don't have the power to make your spouse understand your feelings when you've had a bad day and are stressed out, but you can let them know that you would like them to empathize with your emotions. You can model the behavior by responding empathetically to them. Okay, essentially he's saying, don't assume that your spouse can read your mind. Communicate what's going on with you. Any questions? David. Yeah. It just seems like to me that Randall was bringing his stress home, and that's not his kids. Yeah, absolutely. So he has, maybe at work he can't complain, he can't say anything. Maybe he's in a very toxic environment at work, and so he bottles it all up, and then he erupts over when he comes to his family because he has more freedom there. So so we're not telling Randall, hey, Randall, stop being angry about what's going on at work. Stop feeling frustrated. Stop feeling whatever. We're simply saying change the way you express it. You definitely need to express it. But do it in a healthy way that brings you together closer to your family. Like, communicate it. Take responsibility. Hey, kids, I'm struggling tonight. I had a really hard day at work. If you can just be patient with me. I love you. I care about you. I'm just struggling right now. And that allows the people around you to have compassion. Like, wow, Dad's really struggling. He's trying to be a good man. I really appreciate that. Thanks for letting me know. Because so you're giving your family a lens to interpret your behavior. Like, hey, I'm hurting right now. It's not that I don't love you. It's just that I'm hurting. I had a really hard day. It is not your fault. And me and your mom are going to have a talk, and I'm going to feel a lot better. Or I just need to go alone, be alone with God right now, have some prayer. Okay, we're going to quickly cover these last ones, and then we're going to call it a night. I am going to give you some questions, though, to discuss in just a moment. The law of respect, law number 4. The law of respect states that if we wish for others to respect our boundaries, we need to respect theirs. We can't expect others to cherish our limits if we don't cherish theirs. Mature adults desire the freedom of others as much as their own. So he keeps saying in this book this idea that some people, they read the book and like, they realize, I love the idea of boundaries with kids, boundaries in parenting, but I hate the idea of boundaries in marriage because I walk all over the boundaries. So we really have to, we can't call our spouse out if we're not respecting their boundaries. Mature adults, rather, desire the freedom of others as much as their own. Loving your spouse means desiring and protecting their freedom of choice. It means dying to your wish for them to see things your way and appreciating that they have their own mind, values, and feelings. My spouse does not need to see things their way. In fact, I delight in seeing it her way, actually. Like, Rebecca, that is so crazy to me how you see that. Could you please explain that to me? And when I say that, I'm not trying to change her mind. I really want to understand her so I can appreciate her more. And when I understand where she's coming from, I feel closer to her. And a lot of times, like, wow, that's amazing. That's so cute. I never would have thought of it that way. A lot of times I'll get good insight that way. Husbands learn to rely on their wife's insight, learn to rely on their wife seeing things a different way, because that becomes wisdom for us to make better decisions. Jeff, you agree? I know you agree. You said me all the time. So, okay. So in reality, you have two different wills, needs, and perspectives that come in. Okay, so when the reality of two different wills, needs, and perspectives comes in, you know the honeymoon is over. When you're dating and on the honeymoon period, it's like, whatever you want to do, honey. Right? But then when you get to the place where you're like, actually, I'm tired. Okay, the honeymoon's done. Sorry, it's over. You better start thinking about transitioning to real love because the infatuation is rapidly depleting. This is when the law of respect must be applied. A couple with whom, so I'm going to give you an example here, with Nick and Colleen. Nick and Colleen mentioned the same problem at dinner one night. Nick said, sometimes Colleen withdraws from me for no reason at all. No reason at all. There is a reason, Colleen replied. When I tried to say no to you, and you try to control me, I withdraw. Now, don't you think the husband should know that? Yeah, she withdraws from me for no reason at all. Come to find out, there's an obvious reason. Nick said, I don't try to control you when you say no. Colleen let it go and said, I guess we have a difference of opinion. I guess we'll agree to disagree. The conversation drifted to other subjects. Later that evening, Nick invited me to a ball game a couple of weeks from then. I checked my schedule and said, sorry, I can't. Nick threw up his arms in mock exasperation and said, oh, come on, you can go. Just rearrange things a little. That's what friends do. Colleen had been watching, and she yelled, there it is. There it is. That's how he controls my no. Nick looked surprised and said, I do what? She's right, Nick, I said. I felt the pressure of not being able to say no. The light went on for Nick as he saw how his desire for good things sometimes crossed the line of respect. Anybody relate to that? I thought that was a good one. Okay, so we got the slide here. Cam, if you're still around. just a few basic but also profound questions. So I want you to at least, it's probably too public an environment right here to talk about these, right? We could play some music really loud. But these are so good. So Rebecca, you see these? How might I be crossing your boundaries? Isn't that a healthy question? What's the opposite? You always do that thing, and I hate it. Like, no, we're gonna do something completely different. How might I be crossing your boundaries? And then guess what you do? You interrupt them before they have a chance to answer. Okay? You don't really care what they're going to say. You're just trying to give off this image that you care. No, you got to listen. Like, listen, really hear it. Do you feel I respect your right to say no to me? Do I give you guilt messages, withdraw, or attack you when you set a limit? Will you let me know the next time I don't respect your freedom? I thought those are great. Really good. So, Rebecca, will you? Let me know the next. Now, my wife recently told me that she feels pressured by me sometimes. Now, I could have just said, oh, that hurts my feelings, and made it all about me, right? But like if you love your spouse, you hate saying no to them. All right, we're going to keep moving quickly, and we're almost done. So I want to encourage you, take those home. Take those home. Don't let it ruin your next date night, but use it, okay? I hope no one ends up in the doghouse or on the sofa, as it were. But, like, these are good questions. These humbling and uncomfortable questions show you are concerned for your spouse more than your own convenience. They arise out of self-sacrifice, and they show your generosity of spirit and love, and they can bind your marriage together. So here is how a wife might approach her rage-aholic husband. She could not dictate to him that he can't be angry. Okay, this is kind of a repeat what we said already. So her husband's a rageaholic. She cannot dictate to him that he can't be angry. She should respect his freedom to protest what he does not like. At the same time, however, she might tell him, your raging way of being angry is not acceptable to me. If you don't find other ways of being angry with me, I will have to distance myself from you. Okay? So, anger, that's fine, but the way you express it, not fine. All right, law of emotions. Law of emotion. This is the last one we'll cover for tonight. Larry loved sports, all kinds. His wife, Jen, loved Larry, hated sports. One of their big conflicts was when he would press her to go to a professional hockey game with him. Come on, it'll be fun, Larry would plead, and we'll be together. Though she didn't like hockey at all, Jen would think to herself, God wants me to be loving, and I don't want Larry mad at me. Then, grudgingly, she would accompany him to the game, but without being aware of it, Jen would make sure Larry felt her displeasure. She would do the following: dawdle at home so they would leave late, show no interest in the game, be in a bad mood the whole time, withdraw from Larry emotionally, finally remind him for days how miserable a time she had had. Finally, Larry grew tired of taking this unenthusiastic wife to the hockey games. Quote, I'd rather not go than go and you really not be there, he said. Jen felt hurt that Larry hadn't appreciated her sacrifice for him. She didn't understand that her motives for saying yes to Larry's desire weren't healthy, and that because of this, neither spouse was getting what he or she needed. The law of motivation states that we must be free to say no before we can wholeheartedly say yes. No one can actually love another if he feels he doesn't have a choice not to. Giving your time, love, or vulnerability to your spouse requires that you make your own choice based on your values, not out of fear. If you can't say no because you're afraid, you can't have love. Having to do anything is a sign of that someone is afraid. The following fears prevent a spouse from setting boundaries in marriage. I'm just going to give you the first four. Fear of losing love, fear of a spouse's anger, fear of being alone, fear of being a bad person, fear, fifth one, of one's guilty feelings. Fear always works against love. The have to destroys the choose to. Conversely, love drives out fear. When we are freely choosing to love, we are no longer driven by the above fears. We are driven by affection. If you struggle with any of these fears, work on maturing through them so they do not control you and rob you of the boundaries. Now, we should already know, if you have fears, what are you going to do with those? They need to be communicated in a healthy way. In order to communicate your fears, the first thing you have to do is realize you are afraid. None of us like to say that we're afraid. But self-awareness says, oh, actually, you're responding this way. You have this feeling of angst or whatever inside because you're just afraid. And if that's the case, why don't we actually pray about it to God and actually communicate that with our spouse about what's actually going on? So, for example, if you fear losing love, find safe people who will stick with you and take risks with them, such as being honest. As they stay in relationship with you, you will begin to have less fear of losing love. Learning to pay attention to your motives does not mean saying yes only when you feel like it or want to do something. Can I just say that again? Just like you can say, okay, you have to bear your own burdens, right? Because that's your responsibility. We could use that as an excuse to never help our spouse, right? That would be wrong. Here's another problem, like a potential left turn we could take. Learning to pay attention to your motives does not mean actually saying yes only when you feel like it or want to do something. This is, can you guys fill in the blank? Can you think of it? Hey, I don't feel like it. I'm not going to do it. So if we'll only ever do something for our spouse when we feel like it, what do we call that? Selfishness. Selfishness. Oh, you don't feel like it? Oh, okay, never mind. Yeah, I love that boundaries class. All I ever have to say is I don't feel like it, and I'm allowed to not do anything. That's called selfishness, actually. Many times we make uncomfortable and painful choices to sacrifice for our spouse. However, these choices are based on motives of love and responsibility, not fear of loss. Do you see the difference? So we're saying, I need to willingly choose to suffer, not be made to force to suffer because I'm afraid. You see the difference? Jesus did the will of the Father getting up on the cross voluntarily. Nevertheless, not my will be done. He chooses to do the Father's will. He willingly lays down his life. He's not like, my Father's going to send me to hell if I don't get up on this cross, so I better do it, right? You see the difference? So it's like, okay, we got to quick do an analysis and say, okay, am I being motivated by fear? But don't think that it's an excuse to be selfish. Okay. That's about it. So I'm going to give you your homework for tonight. And this is a set of questions based on the first 5 laws. We'll give you the second set next week. And the homework is to find time just to go through some of these. Now, some of these questions won't be very meaningful to you. Other questions will actually be exactly where you're at right now, probably, okay? Spend your time on the ones that have the most relevance. Kurt, will you help me pass these out? And Josh, please. I don't know what's happening. Okay. It's a 2-page thing. It's a 2-page thing. Thank you so much. So think of these as conversation starters. So you can go through it and highlight the ones that you care about. If you guys have any questions or pushback on anything, feel free to email at us at gospellifechurch@gmail.com, or you can go on our website and hit the contact us thing. I'm happy to answer any questions in detail. Okay? One of the points that he makes, and that the authors make in the book is, you can't actually administer any set of instructions till you actually know the whole problem. So it's really easy to say, oh, my spouse is doing this. Oh, my spouse is such a bad person. Actually, let's hear both sides, and then we can come up with something very meaningful that really works. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to email us. All right, any questions before we close? Trying to get you out of here at time. I know it's late, you're tired, you're hungry, you got work in the morning. Anybody have any questions? All right, so we're having a hot sauce party that Corey's having at Andrew Madre's house on the 29th of this month, Saturday at 3:30. 28th? It's the 28th, not the 29th? Okay then, I will take your word for it. Saturday the 28th, not the 29th. Oh yeah, wow. Yeah. Guys, you know that marriages can be salvaged. I want to say this. In case you know people that are out there who are struggling in their marriage, here's what I like to tell people. In America, no one forces us to get married. Right? So what that tells me is there was a point where you actually liked the person you're now married to. Right? Like there was some romance. So if there was ever any romance, we can get back there. We just have to take all those bricks out of the doorway of communication. And it is a beautiful thing, and it's worth it, and the love that you have on the end of that will be better than the infatuation you had at the beginning. Although the infatuation is a very special time, it's precious, I don't want to minimize it. Okay? All right. Let me just pray a blessing, and we'll just be dismissed. Father, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this subject. Lord, thank you for marriage. Thank you that it's your design, and that when we do it your way, all these blessings happen as a result. That is to say, we come back into harmony with God, with other humans, and the rest of creation. Lord, I pray you would, these people here, Lord, bless them for investing this time. Bless their marriages. Bless their futures, not only in this generation, but for generations to come. Bless their children and their children's children. Lord, give us wisdom and insight. Lord, give us patience and gentleness. Give us self-control by your Holy Spirit, we pray. Lord, give us the wisdom to see the plank that is in our own eye before we seek to approach our spouse with the splinter that is in theirs. And Lord, help us to be willingly enter into bearing one another's burdens while we seek to carry our own load. Lord, all these beautiful principles and truths that you communicate in your word, Lord, we're grateful for them. We desire to be loyal to you, be obedient to your word. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Guys, thanks for your attention. You are dismissed. We'll see you next week, Lord willing.